All right, it's September. I'm back porching it. Yes, out in the outdoors. It's funny that we call this outdoors. Like we define outside through our through our doors, right? I feel like maybe we're doing it wrong out of the gate. Oh, I did out of the gate. Again, people, what frame of references do we have that are not door-centric? Welcome to the ecoChristian podcast. We're exploring what it means to be Christian on planet Earth with me, Caleb Cray Haynes. And people say they're old souls. And I feel like that's kind of a pseudonym that people use sometimes just to say that they're like not an Enneagram 7 or something, right? That they're kind of they're into the indoors, or they're into a little bit slower of pace, or anyway, they do things that maybe they enjoy doing things that your grandma would do. I've been accused of being a grandma on multiple occasions. Whatever that's supposed to mean, because I think grandmas are awesome. So I'm just throwing that out there. If you're a grandma, love it already. Anyway, I'm digging as my wife would say, let me hold your shovel. I have found lately that I've become like the person who walks around my house videoing flowers and butterflies and posting it on the internet and that sort of thing, because everyone's going to want to see how epic this is. Anyway, it has been very encouraging to see how just a little bit of stewardship around a little bit of property can create biodiverse places of biodiverse life and the flourishing of a small little ecosystem here that ripples out into pockets of South Nashville. And so anyway, my wife and I have been really surprised at the amount of pollinators that have been showing up all season. So a word of encouragement for you, friend, and that's kind of what we're talking about today, is this sort of intersection of our need to engage in the work of conservation, right? And sort of wrestling with that question, is quote unquote the natural world better left alone? Or do we have some work to do here, right? Is just protecting it enough? Or is there more that needs to happen? So I'm joined today by Dr. Rick Lindroth, who you'll hear from. But before we get into that, I want to note that it is still, as of recording this, it's September. The season of creation is upon us. If you haven't ever engaged in that liturgical season, friends, it's just a little bit of extra permission for whatever ecclesial community you're a part of to dig into some of the rich resources that are out there around this season that have been curated by some really awesome people. You know what? I'm going to put this sort of the main season of creation website in the show notes for you. And also I wanted to point some awareness to a group called Faith in Place. They're hosting their annual Environment and Spirituality Summit coming up later in September. And I don't think I've ever plugged anything by them, but y'all, they've got Randy Woodley and Robin Wall Kimmerer and some other really awesome people. It's a free online Zoom situation, and if you're the least bit down the rabbit hole with me here, I really encourage you to check that out. And I'm gonna link that summit also in the show notes for you as well. Okay, friends, hang out with me and my new friend Rick as we hear from his expertise around this intersection between science, ecology, conservation, and even science denialism. So hold on. All right, wonderful. And is it Lindroth? Am I saying it right?
Well, yes. If you're Swedish, which it is, it would be Lindroth. But no,
Oh, that's fine.
we've anglicized it to Lindroth. So yeah, that's right.
I love it. All right, friends. Well, here with me today is my one of my newer friends, Dr. Rick Lindroth. I'm already getting it wrong. How's it going, man?
Going well. Thanks for having me, Caleb.
Yes, absolutely. I'm so excited. We've been trying to get to connect for a while, and we've been playing email tag a little bit. So, friends, let me offer a little bit of an introduction and bio for Rick here, and we're going to get into some things. So, Rick is a Vilas Distinguished Achievement Professor of Ecology Emeritus and former Associate Dean for Research at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And his research is focused on the ecology of temperate forest ecosystems with emphasis on global environmental change and biodiversity. He's also been a Fulbright Fellow and is an elected Fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the Ecological Society of America, the Entomological Society of America, and the American Scientific Affiliation. That's just so good. And, I see that you've been a part of publishing nearly 250 journal articles and book chapters. You're currently serving as Distinguished Research Fellow, Natural Sciences with the Lumen Center, which I love to maybe kind of get into some of that, and which is a community of scholars working at the intersection of Christianity and culture. Rick serves on the board of directors for Arasha USA, which we partner with in the show a lot, and is a member of the BioLogos Voices Speakers Bureau, which I hope, friends, if you haven't checked out BioLogos, that you definitely should. And Rick, you're a Wisconsin guy, right? And you and your wife are kind of there in Madison. 2 daughters, 4 grandchildren, all the things.
That's all the essentials right there.
Love it. Man, so Rick and I got to connect, I guess that was earlier this summer, even though it feels like a long time ago.
It was
in May.
April and May, something like that.
Yeah, I think it was early May, and Rick came to town, and we just it just happened, and I hadn't met you before, but we figured out we hooked up at the airport and went to rolled into Dozen Bakery together. So that's what you get if you get to spend a little time with me in Nashville. I'm going to take you to the spots with the best blueberry muffins and
and it was good. It was good.
Oh my gosh, I got to get them for a sponsorship on here, so I'm just plugging it. So, which I don't think that I really got to follow up with your Nashville time. Was it good? Did you get to do any honky tonks or anything like that?
No, that was the Arasha Board of Directors annual in-person meeting. So we were pretty booked.
You guys are busy.
I did some really nice walks along. There's a greenway along a stream where we were located, actually south of town, south of the city, south of Nashville, I should say, for the audience. But didn't really spend much extra time there, was it?
Well, that'll have to be your next visit.
There you go.
Less business, more streams and hikes, because we have lots of those. So, very cool. Well, I'd love to just kind of kick things off, Rick. And I know I just kind of blew through that bio, but there's so much there, and you've been involved for so many years in so many different aspects of this, I'm going to say, creation care conversation, especially around the intersections of science and helping faith leaders and church people sort of bridge some of this knowledge gap and all of this. So, but I'd love to just hear more about your story. How did you become who you are today, doing the work that you're doing, and share as much as you'd like of that sort of trajectory.
Sure. Yeah, thanks. So I like to say that I grew up as a free-range kid. I grew up in northern Illinois. Now it's part of the larger Chicago metropolis, but it wasn't when I was there, many decades ago. grew up running around, playing in the woods, in the streams, in the marshes of land that eventually became home of the Fermi National Accelerator Lab, a big atom smasher. So, yeah, I just fell in love with the natural world at an early age. I knew by the age of 7 that I wanted to be a biologist. And so it was just a straight shot through and never really questioned that decision. Went to school as an undergrad at Iowa State, got a degree in wildlife and fisheries biology, and then on to grad school at the University of Illinois, and then came for my faculty career to Wisconsin, and that's where I've been my whole career. So just retired from that a couple of years ago after putting in roughly, I think, 37, 38 years. So I was on the faculty, I was an ecologist here, and also did a 6-year stint as an associate dean for research at UW. So did a stint in administration as well. So that's kind of the broad outlines of the academic history.
Yeah. I need to know a little bit more about 7-year-old Rick and sort of like you knew you wanted to do biology. What was that?
Yeah, well, I think in retrospect, I had very forgiving and permissive parents. At about the age of 7, we moved to this rural area, which, as I mentioned, became home property of the Fermi Lab. But it was very rural, lots of woods, streams, and I just would play outdoors in the woods all day long, and I'd bring back every animal that I could capture and try to raise it in the house. So, frogs, salamanders, tadpoles, trying to get them to become frogs, turtles. I had half a dozen snapping turtles for about 2 years, captured as babies. And then my grandparents at one point moved to Arkansas, and I was overjoyed to go there and find lizards. We didn't have lizards in northern Illinois, so I brought lizards home. So I had all kinds of animals in captivity. And occasionally they would get out. My dad tells a story of lying in bed one hot summer night and feeling this wet plop on his chest. And it was one of my frogs that had on his way into their bedroom. And my mom opened a lunchbox I'd brought home from school one day, and there was a snake inside. So, they were very nice. But I just fell in love with animals, with nature, and figured that biology would allow me to, pursue that as a passion for a career.
Yeah, well, that's really encouraging. That's what I love to hear, and that's I feel like so much of our work today is to curate spaces where kids can, fall in love with God's creation and those things. I think that's a big sort of underbelly part of, I think the work I feel called to and others around, like, how do we, especially with our kids, how do we kind of get them back outside? How do we get them in these spaces? Because I think so much of, quote unquote, fixing what's gone wrong with our environment really does begin there. I feel like that's a big part of the beginning work.
Right? Yeah. I mean, if we look at your human history, for 99.9% of human history, we are intimately associated with the outdoor world. And now we aren't so much. I think latest EPA results I read from a couple of years ago indicated that the average kid in the United States spends about 10 minutes a day in outdoor free play and 7 hours a day on the screens. So, and adults aren't much better. We've become so fully disconnected from the world around us. And, for many, many years, I was teaching, talking, presenting, lecturing about aspects of creation care, which I still do, and I know you're passionate about. But, in the Christian world, in Christian theology, there's no lack of information about the need for caring for and stewarding creation. What we lack is that actual connection. And so I think it's really true that that we care for the things we love, and we love those things to which we are intimately connected. But if that connection doesn't exist, then any form of creation care or environmental stewardship, whatever we want to call it, becomes just a list of duties and obligations. And it's hard for people to incorporate those into lifestyles, right? So it's much better if those flow out of a natural affinity for and love for the natural world around us. So now I'm talking more and more about what can we do to reestablish connection, which leads to creation care.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you said that really well. Like it's gotta really come from a different place, and that's one thing I write about, and I've thought a lot about, is just the whole the shaming, because it feels like shame or and guilt versus and so we're never gonna solve our problems that way, and
right.
Yeah. Well, so as an ecologist, for the people sitting in the back, right? Talk to us a little bit about some of that nuance between what exactly is ecology, what do ecologists do?
Yeah, sure. I should say also a little bit about the type of ecology that I did. So let me start there, and then I'll back up and talk about what ecology is in general.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
So I broadly called myself a chemical ecologist. So chemical ecologists are interested in how chemistry influences ecological interactions in the world around us. And my emphasis was plant chemistry. So we know that plants form the basis of all food webs, including the human food web on Earth. Plants are very important for capturing energy from the sun and converting it into food. And then that's eaten by plant-eating animals, which we know as herbivores, right? But what's less well known is that all plants also produce, at least all wild plants, produce a sophisticated array of toxins that keep them from being eaten too much or too excessively. Of course, animals have counter-evolved adaptations that allow them to eat them. But these toxins in plants would be things like, what we're familiar with would be caffeine, nicotine, morphine, tannins. A lot of spices are based on these potentially toxic compounds. And so my research really focused on genetic factors in plants and environmental factors outside of the plant and how they impacted the expression of chemistry in the plant. And then what were the repercussions of shifts in chemistry for food webs, ecosystem function, forest health, things like that. So the environmental factors we explored over the course of many decades included things like climate change, enriched atmospheric CO2, ground level ozone, high UV radiation, late summer freezing, droughts, things like that. So we're all interested in how does this shift the composition of the plants, the quality of the plants as food, and then what are the repercussions for how entire ecosystems capture and sequester carbon, and how they cycle nutrients, how they support biodiversity. So that's kind of in a nutshell what my group did for many years. So
great.
You led with, well, let's talk a little bit about ecology. And I sometimes joke that almost everybody will say that they know what ecology is, and almost everybody is wrong. Because
sounds right.
By and large, most people equate ecology with environmentalism, or ecologists with environmentalists. And they're not one and the same. There is overlap, they're not one and the same. Ecology is a science, right? So it's the study of how the natural world works. And it's a study especially of relationships within the natural world, relationships among organisms and between organisms in their broader physical environment. So really the essence of ecology is interactions and connections, interrelationships. One kind of a wordplay I've developed to capture this is Imagine a zoo. Imagine walking through a zoo, and you walk into the house that houses the herps, the turtles and snakes and lizards. Herpetology is the study of lizards and snakes, and etc. And then you go over to the bird house and look at the birds. That's ornithology, a study of birds. And then you go look at the giraffes and the camels and the elephants. That's mammalogy, the study of mammals. And then you might walk into a fish house, a big aquarium. That's ichthyology, the study of fish. And then botany is all the trees and other plants that occur in that area. Now, imagine that all of the walls separating those groups disappeared. That would be the study of ecology. How do those organisms interact?
That would be a
who's eating whom
to walk through.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Who's eating whom? Who's parasitizing whom? Who's developing toxins to not be eaten by whom? So that's the study of ecology. Now, most ecologists that I know love the natural world and are also environmentalists, but environmentalism is really more of action-oriented activism, things like that. So, and very rarely, occasionally, environmentalists and ecologists don't agree on things. But that's more rare than not.
Yeah. I'm curious about that too. I'm like, I guess I could see how, the data might point one direction, but it.
Yeah. So, I mean, environmentalists, like all activists, are passionate about their cause, right? I'm an environmentalist and an ecologist, right? I'm passionate about caring for the earth. Here's one example. About a year and a half ago, the U.S. Forest Service came out with a major report that they'd been spending years, a preliminary report. They'd spent years developing about how best to manage mature and old-growth forest throughout the United States. And under the Biden administration, they were first charged with cataloging, inventorying all old-growth forest, and then they had to develop a plan for how to manage those. And those plans were site-specific, depending on whether the old-growth forest was in Florida versus California. Right. And they put this out for public comment, and the environmental world turned itself upside down, inside out over this. There were calls from all kinds of outdoor organizations, companies, as well as many societies that this was just a smokescreen for the Forest Service to continue operations, doing lumbering, logging, other control things. And so there was a huge public outcry. I don't know how many emails and mailings I got asking me to call my senators, representatives, and tell them that this is not the way for the Forest Service to function. Then I was asked to review the report for a potential podcast, and I read the report, and actually, I thought it was pretty scientifically sound. And what became the crux of the problem was there is a view, and I appreciate this view. I lean toward it. I don't fully accept it, but I lean toward it, that the best way to protect an environment is hands off. Don't touch it. Leave it alone, right? And it will take care of itself. That no longer, that perspective will no longer allow ecosystems to care for themselves as they have historically, because the earth has changed. We have a different climate. We have different land management practices. All kinds of things are changed now, such that if we just let environments take care of themselves, they may change. Take, for example, Yellowstone National Park. It has, prior to 1988, when 1/3 of the park burned, old forests that burned on an average of maybe every 100 to 300 years. And so the forest survived long enough to grow mature trees and replace themselves. And so you had, for millennia, forest stands covering the park. Now that burn cycle, because of climate change and related factors, is probably less than 100 years, even in some evidence saying it's even closer to 30 years. That's going to convert those forests. They can no longer sustain themselves. They will be converted to shrublands or grasslands. That's because the world has changed. It's no longer the way it was. Now, it's a different question of whether humans should intervene in that or not. That's a value question, right? But that's an example of how things have changed, and nature can no longer take care of itself. Another example is the loss of wolves on Isle Royal. So you may know that wolves and moose on Isle Royal are one of the longest standing predator-prey dynamics studies on Earth. Goes back to the early 1900s. Population explosions and declines, up and down, with wolves tracking or really changing moose densities. And it's because they were both established there. They got there by walking across the ice that would occasionally form in really cold winters in the early 1900s, walking across the ice from Minnesota or Canada all the way to Isle Royal in Lake Superior. Well, that ice now no longer forms. And the wolf population was declining in the late 1900s because of a number of factors, including the introduction of human parvovirus, dog parvovirus. So essentially, that wolf population, it became extinct or functionally extinct. It just withered out. And the moose population exploded, and they were causing extraordinary damage to the plant life on the island. But there was a lot of hue and cry among different environmentalists as to whether wolves should be established or not. By establishing them, cost of a few $1,000s or a few tens of $1,000s, you collect some wolves in Canada or Minnesota, you ship them over to Isle Royal, you let them loose, right? That could have reestablished that moose predator-prey dynamics and protected the growth. But there was a lot of pushback because this was a national park, and by definition, national parks are not to be touched, are not to be managed proactively like that. So that's another example of where the ecology, what the ecologists know and what the environmentalists want aren't necessarily in tandem. To conclude the story, the park eventually decided to take over several groups of wolves, which they've released, and now that dynamic is being reestablished. So those are just some examples of how ecology and environmentalism aren't always allies.
Yeah, I think the wolf reintroduction to the wolves, especially that happened in Yellowstone, I think that's just such a beautiful and potent example of this. And and as you were talking, I was thinking about maybe a year or two ago, just here in Tennessee, that the TVA sort of released these plans to, I think it was a TVA, but could have been somebody else, but this certain area kind of up on the plateau that was just kind of, wasn't old growth forest, but there was it was just forested land that had been there for many, many decades. And they it was said in the effort of restoration, they were actually going to take all these trees out, and they were going to allow loggers to sort of take these trees. But the backstory was that this was originally prairie land, and that returning it to prairie land would actually be the biggest benefit ecologically. And I remember personally just really wrestling with that, because I'm thinking climate change is happening, and that it doesn't seem like a great plan to remove this entire forest to try to revert this land back to what it once was, however many centuries ago, or that it was so that I can see how it can get kind of pretty entangled.
Right. And ultimately these then become not scientific decisions, they're value decisions, right? So what do we want Do we want to manage our forest for sustainability and biodiversity, or do we want to manage a forest for production of timber, which we need, right? And so there are value decisions, and somebody's values has to give in order to have others, proceed.
Yeah,
so they're difficult, right?
Yeah.
So science can inform those decisions, but ultimately society, based on whatever values they've adopted, need to make the policy decisions.
Yeah. I think kind of what you said earlier too, of what's underneath this, maybe one of the most important things I feel like for us to digest, these days is around, intervention and do we intervene, et cetera, because the reality is that we've already intervened, right? And the reason you can't just leave this area alone and expect it to be well is because the intervention has already happened unconsciously, I'm going to say, quote unquote, through our excessive release of extra carbon in the atmosphere, wrapping a highway around this tract of land, the chemicals that we've used in our agriculture, and all these. So the quote unquote intervention has already happened. And so what does it mean to re-intervene in order to unintervene, what does it mean to be a good steward today? And, and I think that's really important to sort of chew on. I feel like for us who may think of it in a different sort of leave alone kind of fashion.
Yeah, and there's a lot of conversation going on in the broader environmental ecological world on these topics, and we're becoming increasingly aware that this perspective of a pristine wilderness, and that wilderness is best preserved by leaving it alone, putting up virtual walls around it and reducing human impact. That's, even though I like those ideas, they're increasingly, we're discovering they're probably not true, or they're not valid. Some of those ideas about, preserving in terms of putting up walls and restricting access, to be honest, are largely colonialist, right? I mean, think about how the landlords in Europe protected their lands and kept everybody off, right? And increasingly, we've come to know that ecosystems throughout the world, I just learned this about the boreal forest where I go canoeing north of Lake Superior every year, have been managed in some way by indigenous peoples for millennia. The tropics, many large areas of the tropics, surprising to us, now we're seeing evidence that they were managed. Trees were planted and managed in some ways. Forests in the Great Lakes region, the prairies in the area, that a lot of these were managed more or less by indigenous groups. Now, they did it in a way that was sustainable, whether or not they didn't necessarily, I don't think they necessarily thought that out. They just had low population densities and they used the tools that they had. But they were managed in a sustainable fashion. But this idea that the best wilderness is pristine wilderness, untouched by human hands, I think there's some naivete there.
Well, I think that also kind of goes against the original description of ecology that you offered a minute ago, right? Which was the sort of zoo of relationships. And I think that obviously humans are included in those relationships. Yeah. Now, do we know how to behave? Well, that's part of the rediscovering, right? So what does good behavior look like? And
that's where the rubber meets the road, and that's tough, because how do we best manage these for the flourishing of all life, of our more than human kin? How do we manage to promote biological diversity? How do we manage so that we're not simply extracting resources to aid human, endeavors? Even though to some extent we have to have resources as a population to survive, but
that's right.
How can we treat the world around us in a long-term, sustainable, regenerative fashion for all of life? Those are the tough questions that we're faced with
Absolutely. And, ironically, that kind of goes all the way back to the very first thing that we talked about, which was that childlike delight in creation. It's like what you learned as a young person, right, was that sort of cherishing and that treasure of creation versus like the extractivism of creation, which we learned when we were older, is what are these goods that creation can give me versus what is the good that is creation, and sort of that's so much, again, back to stewarding our children's discovery and our own personal discovery of the delights of creation. But so this conversation is a little serendipitous, I'm going to say, because I recently was meandering through our local library and stumbled upon this book called Becoming Earth by Ferris Jaber, and I think he just wrote it last year. But the premise is how he kind of goes through deep time and the different aspects of ecology, and is sort of like making the case how we usually think about us and all this as a product of what Earth is, versus the Earth that is becoming through our and plant life and animal life and insect life and microbial life processes over deep time and that sort of thing. And and just talking about this conversation around affecting creation, and he writes at length about how the woolly mammoth. So up in the Arctic tundra, historically was all of these really massive land animals,
right?
And come to find out, right, these are pretty essential for permafrost to hang around. So that these mammoths actually play a key role in keeping the permafrost together and all this stuff. And you don't really connect all these dots. Similar with the wolves, right? We thought, oh well, and so now I feel like we're at such a unique point in history and science where we're sort of systematically backpedaling all the things that we thought were progress to say, oh wow, maybe progress looks a lot more entangled than that. And so
well, we're for 200 years we've lived under the lie that somehow humans could live independent of the natural world around us. It's there to provide resources, it's there to provide an escape to play in, but by and large we can build and live our society independent from it. But now we fully know that's entirely not the case. I mean, who was it? Gaylord Nelson, the founder of Earth Day and former senator and governor of my state, who said that the economy is a wholly owned subsidiary of the environment. So, we can't have a healthy economy without a healthy environment. They're so fully interconnected.
Yeah, the economy of creation, and that whole, as you said, the food web that we're all a part of, and So, kind of changing gears for a second, and in some ways this is such a unique time in history when it comes to science, kind of like we're saying, and I even find myself wanting to say with air quotes, right, our beliefs around science, which is ridiculous pairing, So I'm curious with your work how you're encountering and navigating modern science denialism, and how do you find yourself communicating your work with others, and especially Christians?
Oh gosh, where to start? That's a huge question.
Feel free to meander in.
Okay, I'll meander in. Science, like so many other things, has been caught up into the vortex of polarization that has just seemed to have swept up every endeavor of humans in the last 10 to 15, 20 years. It's really sad, and there are very serious consequences. People are dying because of science denialism, right? So it's an issue I've taken on, trying to speak, lecture more and more about what is science denialism, what is effective science communication, and trying to help educate the lay public about that, and that science is very trustworthy. It's a gift of God for us to understand the world and to predict how the world is going to change in the future. So, maybe let me just back up and talk about what science is.
Yeah, absolutely.
What science denialism is, because oftentimes people think of science as just this complex body of facts, or hard stuff, or you have to be uber smart to be a scientist, this and that. And really, science is simply a systematic, rational study of the natural world, the function and structure of the natural world. It's not so much a body of knowledge as it is a way of understanding the world around us. And so it functions through this well-known cyclical process. We make observations about the world. Plant life is green, or the sky is blue. And then we form hypotheses to explain that. And then after we have our hypotheses, then we develop experiments to test those hypotheses. We run the experiments, we analyze the results, and we say, I supported my hypothesis, or I refuted my hypothesis. Then I make some more observations, develop more hypotheses, and this cycle continues. And in the process, we are absolutely committed to following wherever the evidence leads. And that's one of the strong suits of science, is that it really, really relies heavily on a commitment to evidence, a commitment to scientific truth. So the scientific method has self-correction written into it. It's not self-protective. If science goes wrong, it's not politicians, it's not businessmen,
right?
Well, it's not preachers who tell us the science is wrong or define how the science is wrong. It's scientists who determine that the science is wrong, make the correction, and move on, right? So others might be denying the science or saying it's not right, but ultimately it's the scientists who then determine whether it's right or not, and then build on from there. So we follow the evidence no matter where the evidence leads. Right. So what is science denialism? Because there's been a lot written and spoken about that. It's a very big issue today. Think about vaccines, think about climate change, whatever scientific issue you come up with where somebody is affected, there's denialism at play. I would say science denialism is the use of rhetorical, argumentative tactics that give the appearance of legitimate debate over a topic when in actuality there is no legitimate debate. That has moved on. So, long ago, there was debate over, is the Earth a sphere or is it a flat disk? Now, by and large, the flat earthers accepted, with exception, we're not arguing over that anymore. We don't argue over whether the sun orbits the Earth or the Earth orbits the sun. That's kind of established fact. Interestingly, science denial only occurs for those scientific topics that are seen as a threat by some group in society. So we don't see New York Times articles debating the pros and cons of the fundamental mechanisms of photosynthesis. And we don't see people marching and holding protests over the fundamental mechanisms of the Krebs cycle in metabolism. There are scientists might argue about it, but there's nobody whose lives and livelihoods are being threatened, and so they're not subjected to denialism. It's the topics where people's lives are being affected that are subject to denialism. And interestingly, independent of the particular scientific topic, could be vaccines, legitimate, whether they're good or not, could be, is climate change true or not. Denialists rely on the same common set of reasoning errors, 5 or 6 different reasoning errors, and let me just give those to you for your audience. Number 1 is impossible expectations for what science can achieve. Okay, so if you can't tell me that this vaccine is 100% effective, then I'm not going to accept it. Well, science is never going to say 100%. It'll say 95%, 98%. Or if you can't tell me beyond a shadow of a doubt that this, that, or the other thing, I'm not going to accept that as true. So that's, impossible expectations for what science can deliver is one common reasoning error. Another one is cherry-picked data. So denialists will pick a couple of points of data and draw a trend line in between them and come up with a pattern that's the opposite of what the science says. A classic example here is attempts in the early 2000s to say that the Earth was actually cooling. It was not warming because they picked a particular year, 1998, and a particular another year, 2008. And if you drew a line between those two, actually 2008 was cooler than 1998 because 1998 was an El Nino year, unusually warm, and 2008 for some reason was unusually cool. And that showed that over those 10 years, the Earth was cooling. But if you actually filled in all the gaps before, between, and after, there's a very clear trend line in the opposite direction. So that's an example of cherry picking data.
Yeah, I think that's a really important one too, because there's no shortage, I feel like, of YouTube videos and things out there where people have made compilations of cherry-picked data to try to make it like a, like some dramatic, uncovering, when really they've just, it's like a greatest hits video of cherry-picked data. But anyway, I've gotten a few of those emails. So.
Yeah. So then another common reasoning error is use of fake experts, people who may have MD or PhD or something behind their name, but they're really not experts in the subject area. Or similarly, the denigration of true experts. I don't care who you pick. Catherine Hayhoe, who is a Christian climate scientist, she gets raked over the coals, or Anthony Fauci, or if they work in an area that is controversial, their motives, their reasoning, everything is denigrated. Another common reasoning error is logical errors. Oh my gosh, it's whatever, here in Wisconsin, it's 20 below. It's late January, it's 20 below. Whatever happened to climate change? I thought we were supposed to be warming, so logical error. And then the last one is conspiracy theories. That the scientists are all in lockstep. They're just doing it to get grant money, or they're doing it because they believe in one world government, which I've heard, all kinds of things like that. And I'll just tell your audience, I worked in science as a scientist. I worked in science as a science administrator, a dean. I've been an editor for 4 different science journals. I've served on grants panels for USDA and the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the National Science Foundation. I've advised Pew Charitable Trusts and multiple organizations on science. I've evaluated scientific institutes around the world. All right? I've never gotten written orders from the top down on how I'm supposed to do something to establish one world government or to promote a particular leftist agenda. It just doesn't happen. And yet there are these perceptions among some groups, very strong belief that we're just in lockstep with one another trying to advance some type of leftist political agenda onto the world. I've never heard anyone in all those experiences talk about that. And then it's also interesting to note that science is fiercely competitive. As an example, I had submitted a grant proposal to a funding arm of the U.S. Department of Agriculture some years ago. My proposal was ranked in the top 5. It was ranked number 5 out of 99 and was not funded. You had to have been ranked number 4 or lower out of 100 in order to get funding. It's fiercely competitive. And so scientists are doing the best they can to show that their work is better than all of their neighbors. If it was possible for a scientist to disprove climate change, he or she would get a Nobel Prize. Absolutely. And who wouldn't want that? And so these ideas that we're just kind of promoting, core nefarious leftist beliefs just don't hold traction.
Yeah.
So there you go. Impossible expectations for what science can achieve, cherry-picked data, fake experts, logical errors, conspiracy theories. Those are signs of science denialism, independent of what the particular scientific topic is.
I think that's so helpful to sort of name those points and for us as listeners to sort of think about. I think we can all think of examples of some of those in our conversations and lives around us, and I feel like so much of what's in the way. Again, we're in this unique time of social media, and sometimes I just feel like it's the science versus the socials to an extent, because it's I think about that sort of word of the year several years back of post-truth, and because what does it mean that we used to be excited about the kinds of things that science was telling us. Right. We're discovering all sorts of, and we still do, but what does it mean to live in a time that maybe for the first time, science is telling us some really, really bad news. And so no wonder, news that changes everything.
Right.
And so of course there's going to be all this denialism, like it change, like all of this stuff, like, we've got science, sort of uncovering how everything about the ways and even a lot of the things that we enjoy as a part of our lives are apparently really not great things. and so of course that's very hard news. And and so I think communicating, finding a way to sort of gently but firmly communicating, I think, science. And of course you're kind of getting from even in doing that, you're moving from scientists to, like we talked about, ecologists to environmentalists.
Right.
But I guess that's the space that I find myself in a lot, and I'm always trying to kind of navigate.
Yeah, sure. Well, I've really relied heavily on the work of Jonathan Haidt and others, the author of The Righteous Mind, and more recently his popular book has been The Anxious Generation. But he and others who really have helped me and other scientists to understand how best to communicate information. So, when confronted with those who wish to deny the science, historically, we've functioned from the knowledge deficit model. That is, they don't have the right information. Let me give you the right information, and then you're going to change your mind. Well, no, you can give them information all day long. People don't change their mind, right? It's not that they suffer from a knowledge deficit. So then, how is it that we take in new information and decide whether or not it's true? And what the research has showed, fascinatingly, and to me frustratingly, because it makes my job all that much more difficult, is when confronted with new information, most of us would think, oh, we're children of the Enlightenment. We're reasonable people. We would rationally assess whether or not the facts, the facts align, and we give it a good reasoned evaluation. And if it appears to be true, pass our truth test, we would incorporate it into our belief system. And we would be wrong, because that's not what we do. When confronted with new information, we first intuit a response. What is my gut level reaction as to whether or not this is true? And then we use our higher reasoning powers to confirm why that gut intuition is correct. So we spin it to align with our values, to align with our beliefs. And that makes communicating information, as you said, that's difficult information, things we don't want to hear, all that much more challenging. So if we think, what is the best demographic marker, indicator of climate change denialism, of refusal to believe that climate change is real and human-caused? What's the best demographic marker? Demographic markers are things like age, sex, education, faith, location, where you live, race, all those demographic markers. What's the number one strongest indicator of whether a person thinks climate change is real or not? And I ask that of audiences, and they oftentimes will say things like education or faith or a number of others. The number one best telling demographic marker, interestingly, is political affiliation. It's not even political ideology. It's not what your political party says or believes. It's what your political party is, who they are. That's the number one indicator. And so what this all comes around to is that people's identities determine very strongly what they choose to believe as true or not. So people will very readily sacrifice truth in order to retain their identity. We do it all the time, right? And so what now I and others are trying to grapple with in science communication is, how can we convince people of things that are true without challenging their identity, without saying your identity is wrong? So then we need to move toward, well, what are the common values? So if I believe climate change is real, I'm talking with a guy I've met on the trout stream who believes it's not true. Well, what are the values that we share in common? We share a love for the outdoors. We share a love for cold fisheries. And then, those are the ways that we need to work our way into helping people to understand that, their values are actually in conflict with this perception that they have about scientific topic X, Y, or Z. That's a much slower, a much more difficult, a more protracted process than simply lecturing to 300 people and having them change their mind on some topic, right? Yeah. That would be a whole lot easier.
Yes, yeah. And again, all the way back to like the relationships and the relationality of it that we have to be willing to engage in, right? It's not going to happen across social media posts and screens and that sort of thing, but it literally is in the neighborhood. And I think it's all the way back into the ecology, that web of relationships that is our lives around the lives of other people, and that is, I think, so much of the work that sure is challenging, but it's also, I think, what's hopeful about the way forward is that's in some ways it sounds hard, but in some ways like, wow, that's also really easy. Like, yeah, kind of right. Like, anyway.
Yeah, no, I think maybe, we can move toward or close on a hopeful note here. I really encourage people to use whatever resources or tools they have to reconnect with the natural world around them. So an example, my wife and I, we took out a large tree in our front yard. We live in a postage stamp size residential, yard, residential neighborhood. And we took that opportunity to create what we call a pocket prairie. So we now have sunlight in that portion of the front yard. I'm looking at it right now. It's maybe, 40 feet wide by 15 feet wide. So it's not huge. And we recreated a bit of a tall grass prairie there by very intentional planting and manicuring and things like that to promote particular species that we want. I love that. It's not going to change the world, but it makes me hopeful. It gives me joy. It brings me pleasure in seeing this very tiny postage bit of natural ecosystem reemerging the way it had been here 300 years ago. And so what I encourage people to do is find something that they're closely associated with. It doesn't require weekends driving up into the mountains or vacations canoeing in the Canadian wilderness or whatever. The neuroscientists are telling us that our brains are very, very, very plastic, very malleable, even into old age. If you want to develop an attitude of gratitude, what do? You hold a thought of gratitude in your mind, consciously, mindfully thinking of something you're grateful for. Hold that thought for 20 seconds a couple of times a day. You will rewire your brain to have more gratitude. If you want a closer connection with your partner, hold him or her intentionally, thoughtfully, closely, mindfully for 30 seconds once a day. Your brains will rewire to develop a closer relationship. So what I encourage people to do with the natural world is once or twice a day for 30 seconds. It doesn't have to be a long time. For 30 seconds, step outside, behold a leaf, or look at the sky, or watch and listen to the birds. Hold that thought mindfully, emotionally, thoughtfully, and you'll rewire your brain to become more connected with the world around you. And once we develop those connections, then the creation care, then the stewardship, then the nurturing will follow naturally from that.
That's what's up, man. That's a nail on the head there. There's nowhere else but there to go. I love that. And so thank you so much for sharing that. Obviously, there's a slew of things we did not get to or research to talk about and all that stuff, but we'll have to say something for next time. But Rick, thank you so much for this conversation.
Well, it's been delightful. Thank you so much, Caleb, for the invitation. Thanks for what you and your program are doing to help people to connect with the beautiful world around us. I really appreciate it.
All right, y'all, my friends, you are the wind beneath our wings, and we love you and hope to catch you next time. Grace and peace, y'all.